Alright, what's up, YouTube? This is Boxingwave. And first off, I want to wish everyone a happy new year. Okay, I hope everyone had a great holiday season, whatever it is that you celebrate. Happy New Year, happy holidays. I told you guys that wasn't going to be making too many videos until after the new year. It's been a couple of weeks, and I know you guys have been sending me emails, leaving me comments. It was a little break for me. I needed a little break from YouTube. Got some time to spend with family, friends, and I had to work a lot and enjoyed myself. Sometimes, I mean, as much as I love to make videos on YouTube about boxing, I love doing this. It seems like it becomes work sometime, because it's a lot of work to watch boxing. Sometimes I don't really want to watch boxing, but I do it because the channel wants it. I get video requests, and I can't do a video on every single topic, but I try to do as much. I try to cover as much as I can. All right, in all of the divisions. All right. So this is going to be a long video. All right. There's a lot of things that I need to discuss because this is not going to just be a video about what happened in 2019. There's going to be a video about the decade itself. There's a lot of things that I want to cover, discuss. I made like a little list on my phone. I wanted to cover as much as I could. Okay, and a lot happened this decade. I mean, there was a lot of shifts in the sport, and I think the sport in some ways are going into a new direction. And I want to talk about a lot of those things. All right, going into the new decade, 2020, where we are here. All right. First off, let's start talking. Let's start talking about the mega fight of the decade. Floyd Mayweather against Manny Pacquiao finally happened. This was a fight that was built up for 6 years. Ever since Manny moved up to welterweight and he destroyed a faded Oscar De La Hoya. That's when the rumblings began, and it didn't live up to the hype. All right, I won't go as far as saying that it was a black eye for boxing because it wasn't. It wasn't a black eye for boxing because it brought a lot of fans into the sport. I remember having a YouTube channel. I started my channel in about 2013, and back in 2013, even though there are a few number of channels that were around for a while before me, there weren't that many channels. There really wasn't that many channels out at that time. And I can tell you that there were a lot of channels that were just basically there to speak on these two fighters. All right, I want to say half of the channels on YouTube were all about the welterweight division. They were experts when it came to the welterweight division. They would know everything about Manny Pacquiao's record, Floyd Mayweather's record, and they would talk about the surrounding fighters at the welterweight division at that time, based on those two. But outside of that, there weren't many channels out that were discussing all of the other divisions like that. Everything was about the welterweight division. All right, so that was the discussion back, at least when I came on in 2013. It was more about those two. Everything was surrounding those two. And I felt like it brought a lot of fans to the sport. Now, after they fought, it kind of sizzled out a little bit because people were talking about that fight after it happened, but the discussion shifted to the new emerging welterweights at that time. Right after Floyd went on to fight Berto and Pacquiao took his little break, and he eventually came back too. But people started talking about the Thurmans, the Sean Porters of the world, the Danny Garcias who moved up to welterweight, Amir Khan, Kell Brook, etc., etc. And then eventually we started to go talk about Errol Spence. Terrence Crawford eventually moved up to welterweight, and the discussion started to become them. But after those two had their fight, I feel like everyone started to focus on the heavyweight division. All right, Deontay Wilder kept knocking more people out. He's still undefeated. You had Anthony Joshua, who came up, beat Klitschko. You had Tyson Fury, who beat Klitschko first. Okay, and then you had all the other emerging heavyweights. All right, and then the discussion started. The heavyweight division is on top right now. It's back. And then you're talking about, like, let's look at the cruiserweight division. I mean, no one really cared about the cruiserweight division like that until recent years, where it started to become popular all around the world. Even Americans are now talking about it more than it was. And you have to give a lot of credit to the World Boxing Super Series, which is one of the main things that I wanted to talk about this decade. The World Boxing Super Series, in some ways, to me, and I've said this in other videos, is in certain cases, in certain divisions, I felt like it was the most prestigious championship. That trophy, that Muhammad Ali trophy, it was the most prestigious to me, because in certain divisions, like the cruiserweight division, like the light welterweight division, maybe not so much the super middleweight division when Callum Smith won, but certain times the majority of the top fighters were in that division during that tournament. In certain ones, okay, not always. But you had that, and even though financially it might have not profited that well, you still had the best fighting the best for in most cases. Instead of just having guys go up in weight and picking up one title and then going to a different division, stuff like that. That's why you got guys like Broner, who Broner is a guy that has won titles in like four different divisions or something like that. 3 or 4 different divisions. Yet he really failed against the top fighters that he did face. It's easy to just pick up a championship because titles get vacated, and the best are not always fighting the best when it comes to a championship. It just, that's the way boxing is. You got so many titles, and sometimes you can get lucky and win a title based on you fighting a guy that is not necessarily the best in the division. Just might be ranked high, might get lucky. All right, so you got to give a lot of credit to the World Boxing Super Series, which is one of the things that we started. And there's been other tournaments, but this has been this World Boxing Super Series thing has been really working. It's really good, and they got guys that's part of other that's with other promoters to fight against each other. I like it. You got the Zone guys fighting ESPN guys. I believe you had PBC fighters as well fighting in that too. So it's been very, very good. You have to give a lot of credit to that. But overall, the shift is mainly post Mayweather and Pacquiao. Got guys talking about other divisions now. It's not just the welterweight. So the welterweight division is, unfortunately, since there's so many big names there, it's the most political. It's the most gossipy. It's like the reality TV show of the sport. It's that's what the division is. You look at light heavy, light welter. Guys just fight each other. We have Terrence Crawford, who was undisputed in no time. They just fought. And after he went up to 147, look at the light welterweight division now. You got 2 unified champions at this point. And it seems like as soon as Bud left, all of the top guys started fighting each other again. It went like right back into it. No bullshit, none of that. So, yeah, I think the welterweight division is. I'm so glad it's not focused. And with the heavyweight division, even though it's probably the best division, being that now you have the biggest names and stuff up there, we have a lot of what we get in the welterweight division in the heavyweight division now. You got BT, ESPN guys. You got Matchroom, the Zone fighters. You got PBC. Al Heyman fighters and all that stuff. So, so let's talk about a few things. Now, let's talk about the emergence of streaming services. All right, which I'm still supposed to be doing a video that I have like 12 videos that I have to do. I have to catch up on this week. All right, but let's talk about the rise of streaming services. All right, everything is streamed now. You know, not just boxing and sports, but everything is streaming. Everything is just, no one watches television anymore. So in the same decade, we started to get into PBC, which was like big free fights on Fox and all these other networks. All right, even though ESPN had Friday Night Fights, we had NBC who used to show us fights as well. They weren't really big, you know. It was more for the hardcore boxing fans. Most boxing was seen on HBO. The big fights was on HBO, Showtime. You know, we didn't really get much of the bigger fights outside of those two networks. But now ESPN is showing big fights. Okay, Fox is showing big fights. It's not just, HBO is gone. All right, HBO is done with boxing. They left. Showtime still there, but the most of the PBC related fights, the bigger ones, are usually on Fox Sports, whether it's pay per view on regular TV. So we got the rise of streaming. We have the Zone app, all right? We have ESPN Plus, all right? So we get a lot of fights now that are streamed that are on national television now, which is cool. In some ways, it's cool. PPC started giving us some really, really good fights on Fox, right? Really good fights. I think it started with either Keith Thurman Guerrero or Garcia Guerrero or Adrian Bruner against I can't remember who, but these are fights that we were getting early on in the PVC. Okay, and then we would get some on Showtime as well, and they would mix it up. Um, I thought at the time it was a good thing, but it didn't take long for us to start getting the pay per views, and they actually give us the most pay per views. All right, then we got the Zone, which was like a monthly subscription. It started off really cheap at $9.99. I remember when it came out, I first jumped on it right away. It's going up to 20, and it's even Eddie Hearn wants it to go up to 50. I don't know how they were gonna maintain and sustain all these high purses with these fighters and be able to still charge this low monthly payment, the subscription fee, and be able to pay these fighters millions and millions of dollars. But that's their business. I don't know how they were gonna do it, but I figured eventually it'll probably go up in price. To $20, I still feel is reasonable because I feel like a lot of those fights are pay-per-view worthy fights if you're comparing to what PBC have given us. But $50 is too much. I'm gonna be honest with you. I love the Zone. I'm glad I have access to watching the fights on there, but I'm not gonna pay $49.99 to watch fights monthly. I'm just not. If they ever were to jack it up that high, that's too much. Okay, but this is what we got over the years. This is what begun in the decade, and I think it's cool because it's just following what everybody else is doing. No one is really watching television like that. Not like the way they used to. I know I am not. I know I stream mostly everything, and I'm on some kind of plan when I'm watching. I watch everything stream now. I just signed up for the Disney Plus. I think I got a year free with my Verizon wireless subscription, and I got like a year free of Disney Plus. I'm currently watching the Mandalorian, the Star Wars show on there, and I'm subscribed to a lot. You got Netflix, you got everything on there. So it is what it is. HBO, Showtime, all that stuff. Hulu, stuff like that. I mean, that's just the new wave, Everything is subscribed. You subscribe, pay a monthly fee. This is how they're making their money now. All right, Stars. You got the show Power. We watch Power. I'm watching that too. All right, so that's the new way of doing things. All right, so these are the new things that's happened in this new generation of boxing. All right, so let's talk more about the fights. All right, I didn't make a list of certain things that I wanted to speak on. Let's start out with Fighter of the Year, Fighter of the Decade talk. All right, let's start about that. Let's talk more about that. All right, so I think it's a clear cut between the three top fighters of the decade. I think it's pretty clear. It's either Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, or Canelo Alvarez. I think if you're not including those three, I think you would have to put Andre Ward up there. He had a great decade. He won the Super Six tournament in a time where the super middleweight division was on fire. You had him, you had Kessler, you had Andre Dobrell, you had Carl Froch, you had John Pascal still there at that time. Lucien Boutte. It was a lot of fighters. There was a lot of fighters back then, and I think Andre Ward had a great. Even though he had some issues with surgery, he took a break from that, and then he had some promotional issues. I think he did the most on paper. I think the Kovalev fights were. I think there was a lot of controversy behind both fights. I personally think Kovalev got him on the first fight, even though Ward is my guy. I love Andre Ward, and he's one of my favorite fighters. I think Kovalev edged him out in that first fight, especially because of the knockdown. Uh, and I think the second fight was very controversial because of the low blow stuff. All right, but even with that on paper, I think if you're not including Canelo, Pacquiao, and Floyd, I think Andre Ward is number one. If you're not including those three. All right. As far as this year, let's talk about this year really briefly. As far as this year, who do I think Fighter of the Year is? The way I look at it, I think it was between Pacquiao and Canelo. If you look at both fights, I think Pacquiao had the best win against an undefeated Keith Thurman. To me, I like that win the most out of the four fights that these two fighters had. Out of the four, I think the Keith Thurman win was the most significant out of those four. All right, Canelo fought Daniel Jacobs and he fought Sergey Kovalev. But I think the weakest win was the Adrian Broner fight. All right, this is the Adrian Broner, good fighter, not a great fighter. Never was a pound for pound guy to me. I think he was in the mix of that talk uh, up until he fought Maidana. Okay, and there were definitely signs and red flags there. And I'm going to speak more about that more in this video later in this video. But the red flags was definitely there for Broner. But I think up into the Maidana fight, I think he was in the discussion of being in that top 10. Like at the tail end of the top 10 based on just the way he looked and the comparisons to Floyd at that time. But it wasn't a big win for Manny Pacquiao. I think Broner always sells fights because of his mouth and the way that he promotes himself, and he's just a good fighter to have because people are always going to watch it. People want to see him lose. And, he just knows how to sell the fight. People are going to watch a Broner fight. It is what it is. He's not that good, but people are going to watch a Broner fight at the end of the day. But he's not on Daniel Jacobs' level. He's not on Sergey Kovalev level. Even though Kovalev is past his prime, he's never been on a level of those two, in my opinion. I just don't think he is on their level. I think Jacobs did a lot more in his career as a middleweight than Adrian Broner did. And even Broner, I don't want to keep going on because I do want to speak more. I'll speak more on this later because I do want to bring up Adrian Broner. I got to speak on him because there's something about this decade that happened with him that I think needs to be brought up. But I think it's either Manny Pacquiao or Canelo. Canelo went up in two weight divisions, all right? Even though he did semi-collected a belt at 168, because he didn't get a world title at 168 by beating Rocky Fielding. He didn't get the top title, all right? It was a lower title. But Canelo had two good wins. It doesn't matter how you thought the fights went. He beat Daniel Jacobs and he beat Sergey Kovalev in 1 year. He beat both of them in 1 year. So it could go either way. Fight of the year, it can really go either way between those two. Uh, to be honest, where am I gonna go? I like Pacquiao's win the best because what he was able to do at 40, beating undefeated Keith Thurman. Whether you think Keith Thurman was at his best or not, I think that was the most significant win. I was the most impressed. I think that was the most impressive win. But Cole, I think Canelo beating the two of those guys in 1 year was also really big too. Fight of the year. I'm probably gonna have to give it to Canelo. I'm gonna have to give it to Canelo. Only because he got two big wins. I respect those two wins over the win over an Adrian Broner. But I do like the Keith Thurman win the most. All right, but I'll take two over one. I take two really good wins, excellent wins, over one great win. You know, so I'm gonna probably lean towards Canelo with that one. I'm gonna lean towards the Canelo. All right, and in fact, in the way that he won, you also got to give credit too, because even though the Keith Thurman win was huge, Canelo made Daniel Jacobs look very regular as opposed to everybody else. You know what I'm saying? Like Triple G really struggled against Daniel Jacobs. And Canelo made it look easy. He outboxed him. He made it look like he was in a different class. It was a boring fight. It wasn't action packed. It looked like they were sparring, but Canelo made it that way. And when it comes to Sergey Kovalev, even though Kovalev, in my opinion, didn't look strong, he didn't look strong at all. You got to give Canelo the credit for knocking him out. A lot of people feel that fight was that this guy took a dive or whatever. I don't think he took a dive. I think Kovalev didn't look good, but I don't think he took a dive. I just think that he was weaker, and I think he could have been stronger. But to give Canelo credit with that, Canelo was actually pushing the fight before Kovalev even fought Yard. Canelo wanted to fight him regardless. He wanted to fight him before Yard. So even for the argument that me and others made, I have to say that Canelo wanted to fight Kovalev even before he beat Yard. So that's just how it is. All right, as far as fighter of the decade, though, I'm going to go a lot more in depth when it comes to this. Floyd, Canelo, and Manny Pacquiao. I was thinking really hard about this. Really, really hard. Because they all three have faults that you can make. They all three has accomplished so much within a decade. And when I say decade, I'm talking about what you did in 2010. I'm not talking about what you did before that. We know that Manny Pacquiao won titles in 8 different divisions. And we know that Manny Pacquiao won, he had a title in 4 different decades. That's insane. He's the only fighter in the history of this sport to have won titles in 4 different decades. That's incredible. So congratulations for Manny Pacquiao for accomplishing that. That's just insane. All right, but we're only talking about 2010 to the end of 2019. What did you accomplish in those 10 years? Floyd Mayweather, when I bring up Floyd, what did he do? Well, to me, out of the 3, I think if we're talking the top 2, top 3 wins between the 3 of them in a whole decade, I would have to say that Floyd did the best. Floyd has the best 2-3 wins out of the rest of those guys. All right? Because he got a win over Manny Pacquiao. We're talking about on paper. All right? And this particular part, We're talking about what's on paper. He has a win over Manny Pacquiao. He has a win over Canelo Alvarez, who was undefeated, and he has a win over Miguel Cotto. I would say that those were his best 3 wins in the decade, right? Manny Pacquiao beat Cotto before, all right? So we already know that Cotto was stopped by Pacquiao in a more impressive fashion than Floyd Mayweather. Cool, I'll give you that. But that didn't happen in this decade. We're just talking strictly this decade. Floyd beating Cotto was still a good win. This is still Cotto, a cash cow, top fighter. I mean, and plus he did more after. He's done more after Floyd Mayweather lost. It's not like he lost to Floyd and just disappeared or lost every fight after that. You know, he came back. He had a strong comeback. Lost to Canelo, but he had a strong comeback and he finished strong. I mean, he lost to Saddam Ali in his very last fight, but he was still very relevant after Floyd Mayweather. All right. So the thing with Floyd, though, the problem with Floyd is that he only fought half the decade. You know, he really didn't do much after that 2015 win against Berto. After that, he didn't really do much. You know, he fought Conor McGregor and he fought an MMA fighter without it being an MMA fight. You know, he fought Conor McGregor, which was a very hilarious fight. And then he fought another guy in a fight that looked like it was a fake fight. You know, so he didn't fight as long as the other fighters. We know it's hard to really say what he would have done if he had kept boxing like Manny Pacquiao did, you know, or he's doing. But as far as the top wins between the three, I would say Floyd Mayweather's top is Pacquiao, Canelo, Cotto. When it comes to Pacquiao, I would say his top 3 wins were against, I would say against undefeated Tim Bradley, without a doubt. All right. I know he was, you know, most people felt that he was robbed in the first fight. I think Pacquiao won the first fight. But he did beat him in the second fight and got the decision. So you got Thurman, you got Bradley, and you got a win against who else was big? Let's just say I know the top 2 were definitely Bradley and Thurman. Were probably his best 2 wins of the decade. Great wins. But they're not better than Floyd's 2 wins. Or, you know, they're not better than those 2. They're not. If you're just taking Canelo and him beating Manny Pacquiao, not better. Not better. And I think the other issue with Pacquiao is him getting knocked out by Marquez. And I don't think he won the Marquez third fight. You know, I think he got a gift against Marquez in that third fight. You know, and these, I'm trying to bring up both points. You know, I'm trying to bring up, you know, what are some of the accomplishments that these fighters had and what are some of the negative aspects of what they've done. Floyd for half a decade, and then fought a MMA fighter that's never been in a professional fight, and he fought another MMA fighter in a fight that was just bullshit. All right, so you can take that away from Floyd. You can knock him for that. For Pacquiao, he has losses on paper. On paper, he lost to Tim Bradley. Most people felt that Pacquiao was robbed. Most people felt that he was robbed against Jeff Horn. Those were 2 close fights that I think Pacquiao won. I think Pacquiao won those fights. I think Bradley got a gift in the first fight. I think Horn got a gift in that fight. Right? But one thing I was bothered about Pacquiao losing to Horn is Pacquiao didn't bother to avenge that loss. All right? Should have avenged that loss. Regardless of what, he never went on to avenge that loss. Sorry, that bothered me. Okay, doesn't matter how I felt. On paper, he has a loss, and on paper, he has a loss against Bradley, which he went on to avenge twice. All right, and he even dropped Bradley a couple times in that third fight. Dominated Bradley in the third fight, and he was knocked out by Marquez. All right. So you got to take that away from Manny Pacquiao. All right. So now let's talk about Canelo Alvarez. Now this is the thing about Canelo. Canelo is a lot younger than Floyd and He's a lot younger than Floyd and Pacquiao. So he starts off the decade fighting guys that are on a lower level. You know, he's fighting Jose Miguel Cotto. He's fighting guys like, uh, guys that were older. He's fighting old Shane Mosley after Floyd already beat him, after Pacquiao even beat him after that. Shane Mosley is way past his prime, not really relevant at this point, the time that Canelo beats him. Right? So he's coming off, he's fighting guys like Alfonso Gomez, he's fighting a bunch of guys that no one it really doesn't matter up until the fight he fight Austin Trout, which was a good fight. That was a good win to have on your name. Because at that time, Austin Trout was coming off the win against Miguel Cotto. He was undefeated, he was champion. Alright, so he fights Austin Trout, beats him. He fights Floyd Mayweather, loses the fight. But he goes on to fight guys like Lara. He fights Angulo. He's fighting all these guys at 154. Goes on to fight Triple G a couple times. He beats Sergey Kovalev, which is what I mentioned earlier. He beats Miguel Cotto. He's picking up a lot of wins. Like, he has a strong decade. All right, only one loss against Floyd Mayweather, arguably one of the best fighters of all time. Only one loss against Floyd Mayweather. All right, and I would say his best fights of the decade, I would say, will probably be against Sergey Kovalev and Triple G. And probably Miguel Cotto as well. I would say those are his top 3 wins. How do I feel? The problem with Canelo, this is my issue with Canelo. This is what most people's issue with Canelo. Let's talk about it. Let's be honest here. Because we all got issues with all of these fighters. The issue with Canelo is that judges, okay? People don't like the judges. I know I don't like the judges when it comes to Canelo fights. If you go to BoxRec and you look at the scorecards, you would think that, if you didn't see the fight, you would think that Canelo dominated Austin Trout, which I had Trout winning the second half because of the fact that Canelo slowed down. Now, I think Canelo won the fight, barely, because of the knockdown as well. But if you look at the scorecards, you would think that Canelo dominated, which he didn't. Lara fight, I didn't think Canelo won the fight at all. I don't think it was a draw. I think that Lara clearly won. You might not like the way that Lara fought the fight, but I thought he clearly won the fight. I thought he clearly won. Is it competitive? Yeah, absolutely. Is it the worst robbery I've ever seen? No, it's not. But I think that Lara won the fight. And many people do. Okay? But it is what it is. On paper, Canelo got the win against Lara. Alright, but then there's other fights. As we go down the list, you have the Floyd Mayweather fight. There's actually a judge that actually scored it a draw. That fight, really? A draw? That fight? So what happened to that judge? Let's move forward. Triple G, first fight. You had a judge scoring it like 118 to 110 for Canelo. That scorecard, right? Not only did I think that was another fight that Canelo clearly lost, but you had a scorecard that was pre-written before the fight. Like, there's no way you could give Triple G only 2 rounds. Like, dude, come on. Like, if you're going to rob the guy, don't make it so obvious. The fight was a lot more, the fight was very competitive. But did Canelo win? Not only did I not think he won, but come on, man. Most people think Triple G won both fights. I think the second fight is very debatable. Very, very debatable. Now, I think Triple G won both. But I thought the second fight could have gone either way. First viewing, I actually thought Canelo won. Second viewing, and any time after that I've seen the fight since then, I thought that Triple G edged it. All right, but that one was debatable. But you have a draw and a win over someone that, you didn't really beat, in my opinion. It just seems like the judges are always on your side, and that's why people have issues with Canelo. Then you got the tainted meat thing, and people bring up that, and these are some of the issues that people have with Canelo. And then I have like certain fights that you didn't take. You moved around, you bounced around divisions. You got the WBO thing when he was at 154. You didn't want to fight Andre Den when he had the title, but as soon as he gets stripped, you fight Liam Smith, who it's like those are little things that people hate Canelo for. So Canelo, as far as on paper, if you're just looking and comparing the two, and you're just looking at the body of work, the amount of fights that he had over the years, and the amount of wins that he had on paper, Canelo could easily be viewed as fighter of the decade. Easily. Pacquiao can easily be viewed as fighter of the decade. He beat Keith Thurman undefeated. He beat Tim Bradley undefeated. Those are big wins. Bradley ran 140 before he went up. He was undisputed, but he gave a lot of people their first loss. Devin Alexander, Lamont Peterson. Bradley did his thing. He did his thing even as a welterweight. He got a win over Jesse Vargas. He has a win over Marquez. Bradley did his thing. So I think having a win over him is big. Having wins over Keith Thurman is big. Especially Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman, who was been doing his thing as a welter, next generation after Manny and Floyd. Those are big. So it could have gone to him. And then you got Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather has wins over Manny and Canelo. Argument over. He might have not boxed as long or had as many fights. But outside of Maidana 1, Floyd didn't almost lose to anyone. He didn't almost lose to anyone. He beat Manny Pacquiao. He beat Canelo Alvarez. He had a good competitive fight against Miguel Cotto. But I think he beat Cotto. That's another fight that I didn't bring up. Even a Cotto fight, if you look at the scorecards, you would think Canelo dominated Cotto. I think Canelo won the fight 7 rounds to 5. If you push in the 8 rounds to 4, tops, that's not dominant. That's a good competitive fight. But if you look at the scorecards, you would think that Canelo dominated a fight. So, me personally, fighter of the decade, I think you could make a good case out of those 3. I'm more impressed by Floyd getting those 2 wins over Canelo and Pacquiao. So, to me, I'm picking him. And I know people are going to hate that, but it really, listen, that's the way I see it. He has solid wins. He beat Guerrero. He beat Guerrero when he was relevant. He beat Victor Ortiz when he was relevant. It's about when do you fight these guys? You're fighting at a time where they're relevant. Those are solid fights. Might not seem like it now, but at that time, they were solid fights. He kept consistently having solid fights. I remember when we were upset that he talked about having a fight against Andre Berto or a Kareem Mayfield. I remember the whole internet went crazy when he said that. But this is Andre Berto, who not only was a former champion, but Andre Berto is still on the same level as a lot of other fighters and above level as some of the fighters that both Pacquiao and Canelo face. Like, how many fighters did Pacquiao and Canelo face that you just knew they were to win before the fight? It was a lot. I could. It's too many to name for the two of them. I mean, Pacquiao just for Adrian Broner. Is that any different from Floyd fighting Andre Berto? Is that any different from Pacquiao fighting a Lucas Matisse or a Brandon Rios? These are all the fighters that, or Jesse Vargas. Is it really that bad? A lot of double standards here. So, and Canelo, same thing. I brought up Liam Smith a minute ago. I brought Alfredo Angulo, and there are fighters there that we didn't really care for. Amir Khan was just a name. We knew that Amir Khan. Well, some people didn't thought that was going to be a. I think I actually predicted 6-round knockout for Canelo Alvarez in that fight. You know. So anyway, I think Floyd. I'm gonna go with Floyd. It is what it is. That's how I see it. All right, so let's move on. Let's move on. Let's talk about some other things in this decade. I had wrote a list of some things that happened over the decade and that I wanted to speak on and go over. All right, so let's talk a little bit about man, top fights of the decade, of the year. The year I would probably give no Donaire against Inoue. That was probably my favorite fight of the year. I think that was my number one. If I had to say number 2 and 3, no order, I would probably say Spence and Porter, and I would also say Joshua against Ruiz. How can I forget? Even though that was a stoppage and everything, it was a great, great fight. I was there that day. And to me, it was an amazing fight, man. Like, it was crazy, you know? I'm trying to find this list that I made for this video. And I can't find it for some reason, even though I just had it up. But anyway, all right. I just have to go over the head because I can't find it. Let's talk about some of the other things that happened. Those were the best fights of the year. You also had Harrison Charlo was a great way to end the year. That was another top 10 fight. You had Josh Taylor against Regis Prograis, another top 10 fight. You had Julian Williams, J-Rock against Jarrett Hurd. It was another top 10 fight. Yeah. But I would say my personal favorite was Inoue against Donaire. That was one of my favorite fights of the decade. That's probably a top 5 for me. Not number 1, but top 5 maybe, top 10. That was a great fight of the decade. Fights of the decade. Oh, I would probably say fight of the decade. I don't know if I could say number 1, but I have to think Berto against Victor Ortiz. That fight I fucking love that fight. That's like a fight that I go back and watch every couple of years just for the hell of it. That was a great fight, man. I love that fight to death. That was a great fight. I mean, they both traded knockdowns in certain rounds. It was like knockdowns, flash knockdowns. That fight was a war, man. I mean, damn, that was a good fight. That was Louis. That was highlight. That was the highlight of both of their careers, to be honest. But Victor Ortiz, that was definitely a highlight for him because the way things was looking for him and him quitting against Maidana and for him to come back and pick up a win like that, it was great. I mean, he went and ruined it in his very next fight against Floyd Mayweather, and the way that was, the headbutt and the leaping headbutt he tried to do, but and everything that happened after that. But yeah, man, that first fight was a classic to me. To me, it was a classic. Another classic, Tim Bradley against Ruslan Provodnikov. If you're just looking at a war, I mean, listen, Tim Bradley, a good boxer, fought a very stupid fight against a guy that hits as hard as Provodnikov. He never really was the same after that fight, but that was a great fight. That was a great fight, man. And when Bradley got it together, there was moments that he was outboxing and outscoring Provodnikov, which made sense, but Bradley is like a guy that wants to be a brawler, but he's not good at it. You know, he's one of those fighters that want to be a brawler so bad. He's a good boxer, but he wants to fight like a brawler. He's like not smart, you know. He doesn't take the smart approach, and he gets in trouble like that because once he gets rocked, he's gotten rocked by so many fighters that he can just simply outbox. You know, but because of that, that was a great classic fight for me. Another classic, can't go by and can't forget and bring up this fight. Anthony Joshua against Vladimir Klitschko. All-time heavyweight classic. Classic. It was the highlight of Joshua's career. At that very moment, Joshua was at the peak of his career. That very moment, that fight right there, even though Klitschko was coming back off a little layoff after losing to Fury, that fight was a classic. Like, that was a classic heavyweight. These guys traded knockdowns. He ended up stopping Klitschko. Klitschko was fighting in a different way. Klitschko was fighting like a desperate man. I mean, even though he got clearly outboxed by Fury, he never took any chances in the Fury fight, which in this fight, he brought the pressure to Joshua. He forced Joshua to fight a very, very careful fight. You know, I loved it. It was a great fight. It was very action packed. I loved it. You know, it was a great fight. Damn, I wish I could find this list that I did. I just had it up and I don't know what I did because I'm sure there's fights that I'm forgetting, and you know it would make for a better video if I could remember every single day that I put down. I mean, I put down so many different notes of different things that took place in this past decade, and for some reason I just had it, and I think maybe I hit the delete button by accident. I don't know what I did, but whatever. I gotta freestyle this now. All right, but those are some of the few fights that came up that I thought of over the years of fights that were great. And let's go into robberies. And I was speaking to my boy Chad, USA MVP, that used to make videos. I used to make videos with him on here. We had a discussion about biggest robberies of the decade. Now, the first robbery always comes up in everybody's mind was the most recent one with Anthony Joshua. Or not robberies. I'm saying not robberies. Upsets. Biggest upsets of this decade was clearly Anthony Joshua, who reads. That's the upset we all bring up. That's the upset that you know, people compare to Tyson losing you know, Buster Douglas, and you know, Holyfield losing a Rock. I mean, not Holyfield. Lennox Lewis losing a Rockman and stuff like that. But I want to bring up Adrian Bruner. And he made a good point when we had this phone conversation. And I agree with him. We were texting each other. I agree with him. Adrian Broner against Marcus Maidana is like a huge upset that tends to get swept under the rug because it was one of my earliest videos that I did on this channel. And I remember I did a prediction. It's probably the first wrong prediction that I had on this channel. And I can tell you that at that time, at that very moment, I viewed the fight as a tune-up for Broner. And I know Maidana at the time was making a good run. You know, I know he was training with Robert Garcia. I know he was. To be honest, man, you would have to nominate Maidana as probably one of the most improved, probably the most improved fighter of the decade. You would have to say that because Maidana is a fighter that didn't have a jab, that wasn't really trained properly. I mean, look at what Devin Alexander was able to do. Like, Devin Alexander was able to shut him out. It made it look very, very easy. And Maidana not only went to go on and beat Adrian Broner and give him his first L by knocking him down a couple of times in that fight, but he was able to go and give Floyd Mayweather one of the toughest fights of his career. Top 3 toughest fight for Floyd Mayweather. And forced a rematch. because it was people that thought Maidana won the fight. And I'm not gonna be honest. The first time I saw the fight, I thought Floyd lost too. I thought I scored it 5 rounds or 6 rounds. I think when I watched it again, or I think when I first, I don't think I scored it the first time I saw it. But I know that when I saw it again, I think it should have been a draw because I gave Maidana the 5 of the first 6 rounds, and I gave Maidana only 1 round in the second half. And then I gave Floyd, I think it was 6-6. But yeah, who would ever think Maidana's gonna do that? Now going back to upsets, Adrian Broner at the time was undefeated, and he got destroyed by Maidana. Destroyed him. Destroyed him. And Adrian Broner at the time was viewed to be the next big thing. He was going to be, people were comparing him to Floyd. Big, big upset. Huge upset. Huge. So, yeah, I think you have to bring up the Adrian Broner Marcos Maidana fight. I think the obvious one is always Joshua against Ruiz, but I think a lot of that is because you got to remember going into that fight. I think when I compare the two and how people felt going into both fights, I think Ruiz had a better chance just of who we thought he was going into that fight. I think Ruiz had a better chance of beating Joshua than Maidana did against Broner. You know? I know the Joshua fight was a bigger upset because Joshua is a bigger star than Adrian Broner worldwide. But Maidana at that time was a tune-up. A lot of us viewed that as a tune-up fight. I know it looks crazy now, but in 2013, people viewed Maidana as a tune-up for Adrian Broner, as opposed to Ruiz, who was a replacement, but a better replacement. I think before that fight, I thought Ruiz was a better fighter than Gerald Miller. And a lot of us did. A lot of us did. A lot of us believed that Ruiz is going to win the fight. I mean, just look at the climate of everything that happened leading to that fight. I mean, just the struggle of trying to find an opponent to replace Gerald Miller. Okay? And all of the rumors before the fight. Okay? About what happened in sparring, what happened before the fight. All right? And I think the likelihood of an upset against Joshua was more believable. You know what I'm saying? Than it was with Adrian Broner back in 2013. All right, so that's the point that I'm making. But both huge upsets, but I had to bring that up because I haven't heard anyone really bring that fight up. It was a huge upset at the time. All right, other fights, I think Horn versus Pacquiao was a huge upset. Horn was just... Nobody expected Horn to win. No one really would believe that Pacquiao had any business fighting him. So you gotta bring that up. I know Horn is fighting at middleweight right now, but it didn't even matter. Horn. No one expected Horn to beat. Let's just be real. No one expected Horn to beat Manny Pacquiao. People were upset that they were even fighting each other. Okay, so that was a huge upset, and you have to put that up there. Other fights that I named, no, I just named a few because I couldn't think of anything. DeGale against Truex, that was a big upset. Totally random. Also, I thought this was an upset for me. It was the Amir Imam against Adrian Granado's fight. I know Imam was still trying to prove himself, but it was just like so random. It's not that I really didn't know much about Adrian Granados going into that fight. So others that were following him up into that point, they can see why Imam lost. But let's just think about it for a second. At the time that loss happened, people were already like comparing Imam to Bud Crawford and some of the other top fighters at 140. no one was really bringing up Adrian Granados. So to me, that was an upset. And Adrian Granados, I mean, outside of the knockdown earlier, he pretty much destroyed Amir Imam. Okay, I know it's not. I know Imam has lost his now, and he's not really viewed to be a top fighter anymore. But at that time, I thought that was a huge, huge upset. All right, yeah, I'm gonna call you back. I'm doing a video. All right, so yeah, those are just a few fights that I wanted to bring up. So I have a list of knockouts here that I made. I was able to find everything on my phone. Took a little break, and I was able to find everything on the phone. Some knockouts, random knockouts. I know there's plenty of other knockouts that I didn't mention, but these are knockouts that just came, that popped up. Uh, Stevenson against Chad Dawson. All right, huge knockout. That knockout was crazy. Marquez against Pacquiao in the fourth fight. Yo, that knockout was, I'm the only one. And please leave comments. When I seen that live, I'm talking about the moment it happened in the 10 seconds after that knockout. I seriously thought, I feared for Pacquiao's life. He got knocked out and he was laying flat on his face, not moving. Like, that was insane. You know, it looked that I was more scared than anything because the way he was laying, you know? And to be honest, it wasn't until I rewinded it, I didn't even see where the punch came from. That's how shocking that knockout was at that time. Huge knockout at that time. All right. Uh, Canelo against James Kirkland, vicious, vicious knockout. You know, and it was like Kirkland was throwing a punch when he got caught, and he kind of just spun around, you know, and got dropped. Crazy, crazy knockout. All right, another knockout I had that I thought about. Wilder against Arthur Spilka. Oh my God! You know, in a very, very competitive fight. Up until that point, that was probably Wilder's toughest fight in his career. I think I had scored it 5 rounds to 4 for Spilka, but it seemed like the momentum was coming back in Wilder's favor a little bit. Great, great fight. One of my personal favorite Wilder fights, outside of Luis Ortiz one and Tyson Fury fight, which wasn't a great fight. I thought the 12th round was a great round, but wasn't a great fight. But Wilder against Spilka, crazy knockout. Spilka was out. And he's another guy that I was worried about, like the way he was laid out and wasn't moving for a while. Okay, it took a while for him to recover. All right, but very, very dangerous knockout, and probably Wilder's biggest knockout in my opinion. Up there, he has something. He has a good. You can actually do a top 10 Wilder knockout thing. I mean, he has like 40 knockouts. So, but I think that one was like, that was crazy, you know, because it just came out of nowhere. All right, like a lot of them do. All right, Charlo against Lubin, crazy knockout. Another crazy knockout. And it was so weird because of the way the punch was thrown and the way that Lubin kind of leaned into the punch, right into it, hit the side of his head. It was just a very, very dangerous position to be in. And Lubin, it was the shot, not just the shot, but the way Lubin was reacting. He was stiff, and you know his arm was stuck in the air, and he was moving all weird on a. Too early of a fight for him to take. Too early, you know. But I mean, the way that punch was placed, it was just like perfect, you know. If for it to happen in the very, very first round, I picked Charlo to win that fight, but I didn't think it would be like that. You know what I'm saying? Thought it was too soon for Lubin, though, definitely. David Lemieux against Curtis Stevens. Oh, man. The way Stevens got knocked out then, and he's been getting, I think he should hang the gloves up, man. If he's still, I don't know if he's still boxing anymore. I know he recently went to 154 and got knocked out again. But I think it's time, man. And Stevens, the way he fell in that fight, it was just ugly. It was ugly, man. And Stevens' mom was in the crowd. It was bad, man. He fell backwards. David Lemieux, vicious, vicious knockout puncher. Such a dangerous fighter. Big punch. You know, definitely one of the biggest punchers. Not the best boxers, but definitely one of the biggest punchers of the decade. David Lemieux, you know. And Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez against Sor Rungvisai. That knockout was crazy. The punch, the way he fell. He was out cold, laying there stiff. Roman Gonzalez got knocked out, man. It was crazy. It was crazy watching that knockout. That was another one. So these are the knockouts that I named. I know there's a million knockouts. There's a million, but I'm talking about like top name fighters. I'm sure I missed some, but those are the ones that I came up with. And yeah, so let me just highlight some other fights that happened throughout the decade. All right, I just put down some fighters beginning from the beginning all the way up to now. Some good fights that we saw, just going back throughout the decade that I can remember. I know I forgot some, and guys, please leave comments on some of the fights that I missed, knockouts, best fights, fighter of the decade. I know you guys are going to talk a lot about fighter of the decade, fighter of the year, stuff like that. I know it's going to be heavy debates between Floyd, Manny, Canelo, and stuff like that. But please be sure to leave comments. But these are some fights that I mentioned. Sergio Martinez against Julio Cesar Chavez. Martinez was dominated the whole fight, outboxing Chavez Jr. easily. And then the 12th round happened. And Sergio Martinez almost lost the fight, man. It was like almost one of those Mickey Bay, John Molina Jr. moments, you know, where Mickey Bay is just outboxing John Molina, and Molina just turned the fight around in the 12th round and won. We almost got one of those type of fights there, right? Let's see. Victor Ortiz, who I brought up early in this video, against Josecito Lopez. Another crazy fight. Ortiz was winning the fight, and Lopez landed a shot, broke his jaw, man, and then, you know, eventually the fight was stopped. But crazy, crazy fight. It was a very good fight. Josecito Lopez has been in a lot of very good fights. He's been in a lot of good fights. You got to give him credit, you know. His fight against Marcus Maidana was good. Even the fight with, what's this guy? Soto Karass against Marcus Maidana. He was in a good fight, you know. Soto Karass was also in a really good fight against the Japanese fighter. I can't think of his name. I might have put him down in this list, but Soto Karass got in some wars, too. All right, Quillen against Indom, another good fight. People probably forgot that fight, man, but Quillen knocked Indom down a lot. But Indom was able to hurt Quillen. You know, Quillen was always one of those fighters that I was like always unsure about, because he had some fights where, you know, I always thought he was kind of chinny, you know, and in the Gabe Rosado fight we saw that, the Indom fight we saw that, you know, Quillen had his fights, you know, that he was always kind of suspect for me, you know, even though he was a champion undefeated at 160 for a little while. All right. Danny versus Amir Khan, another fight which was a short fight, but it was very good up until Danny got, you know, rocked Amir Khan. Good fight. Pacquiao against Marquez 4. The best out of, I mean, that was probably the best one out of the 4 fights. I mean, they all were really good, but leading up to that knockdown, that was a really, really good fight. You know, because Pacquiao was coming at Marquez, man. He was putting the business on Marquez. Marquez knocked him down early, but Pacquiao was going on, like, he was trying to make that fight a clear win. You know, and he got ended up paying for it, right? Mike Alvarado against the Rios trilogy. That's another trilogy that was good, especially the first fight. The first fight, man, I remember watching that fight. I don't know if I had a channel up at that time, but that was a great fight. The first fight, you know. The second fight, Mike Alvarado took it to the boxing level and fought a more safety first fight. It wasn't a war like the first one. It was still a good fight. And then the third fight, Rios was just better, man. It was way better at that time. And he prepared right, and he dominated Mike Alvarado in the third fight, right? All right, so who else we had? We had Maidana against Soto Karass, which was another good war. This is when Maidana started to become that more improved boxer. This is when he started working on his jab. He started working with Robert Garcia. Good fight. Then we got Froch versus Groves, both fights, man. I think the second, I don't know if both fights were in the Wembley, but I think the second fight was definitely in Wembley. And that first fight was crazy because Froch was easily getting outboxed by Groves in that first fight. And then there was a stoppage, and it was very, you know, a lot of people were debating whether that was, you know, the referee jumped in too soon and premature and everything. But just the whole work up and build. I remember doing videos on those 2 fights back then. Man, that was a good UK scrap for over there. You know, a lot of Americans wasn't really in tune to it, but you know, I remember at that time I was one of the very few American channels that were really pushing that fight between those two. You know what I'm saying? Because Groves was undefeated until he fought Froch. All right, and he gave James DeGale his first L, but That was good. Those two fights were really, really good. Those both happened this decade. All right, Bradley versus Provodnikov, what I brought up earlier. Lara versus Angulo, which was a great, great fight. You know, people talk about Lara running, but Lara do have a few classic fights. His fight against Paul Williams, which I thought he was robbed. Great, great fight. You know, Lara can have good fights depending on who he's facing. You know, because if he fights a pressure fighter like Angulo, like Paul Williams, like Jarrett Hurd, he has great fights. But if he fights a guy that kind of lets him do what he wants to do, it could be a boring fight. You know, that's how Lara fights usually go. But Lara versus Angulo was a very, very, very good fight. And so was Jarrett Hurd against Aristotle Lara as well. All right, Broner Maidana brought that up. What other fights? You got Crawford against Gamboa. That was good, good scrap with Gamboa. You know, he had Crawford fighting as a righty first, and Gamboa was really still sharp at the time. He was still sharp. He was still undefeated. Even though he was smaller than Crawford, his boxing skills at the beginning of the fight, the first 4 rounds of the fight, was really good. And then once Crawford switched to southpaw and adjusted a little bit, he started to outwork Gamboa, started to hurt him with some shots, and he took Gamboa out eventually. But it was a really good fight for Crawford. That was a highlight of his career up until that point. It was a highlight of Crawford because it was a big fight over in Omaha, and it was a big fight for his city. It was a big deal at that time, you know. So salute to Crawford at 135. That was the highlight of his career at that time. All right, and let's move on. So I'm trying to think. I named so many fights here. Matisse against Molina, great war. That was a war. Molina was putting to the business on Matisse at that time, you know. But Matisse came back and fought it out and came back and pulled off the win. That was a great, great back and forth fight right there. Great fight. Definitely fight of the year candidate of that year, whatever year that was. All right, and this is another fight people forgot. Amir Mansour against Steve Cunningham. Great, great fight. Step up for Amir Mansour at that time. That was undefeated at that time. He was an older guy. He did his time in prison. Came out, was picking up some big knockouts. And then he fought Steve Cunningham, which was his first test at the time. And even though he hurt Cunningham in that fight, dropped him in that fight, Steve Cunningham was able to pull it off with his experience. And he was able to pull off a win in a very, very close, action-packed fight. That was a great fight that year. Whatever year that was one of the better heavyweight fights of that year, all right? So these are just random fights. You got Wilder and his KO spree. I talked about that earlier. You had Vargas against Miura. That was a great Francisco Vargas. And all those guys, Salido, all those guys at that time was just destroying each other, you know, down at 130. All right, so there's a lot of good fights between those guys. Thurman versus Porter was a great fight. Great close matchup. Could have gone either way, depending on the judges. Porter could have easily won that fight. And I feel the same way about Spence against Porter. It was a really close fight between both of those fights. Was really close. Really, really good fights. You know, Thurman Porter was great. Classic fight. One of the best fights of the year, if not fight of the year. Great fight. Joe Smith Jr. against B-Hop. I don't know why I put that in there. I don't remember that being a good fight, but it was just one. I don't know why I put that. Derek Chisora against Dillian White, the first fight. War. You know, if you like just a big guys, no defense, just punching each other in the face continuously. Good build up to that fight. You know, the second fight wasn't as action packed. It was more technical, it was more strategic, but the first fight was just a straight up war. One of the better wars of the decade. Definitely White against Chisora. James DeGale and Battle Jack was another great fight. A great fight. This is when DeGale got his teeth knocked out. That ended up being a draw. You know, Wilder against Ortiz was a great fight. A fight that I went to. There was a lot of YouTube beef. I had a lot of YouTube beef with you guys with that fight, man. All the Wilder freaking fans came and attacked me after that one because I thought Ortiz was going to win that fight. All right, but it was he had his moment in that first fight. He had his moment. Almost got Wilder out of there in that one round, I think the 7th round. But great fight that I went to. Great fight, and probably Wilder's best fight. My favorite Wilder fight. Second is probably the Spoko fight, but my favorite Wilder fight was Ortiz and Wilder. That was the best Wilder fight up to date. Most competitive Wilder fight too, without a doubt. Outside of Tyson Fury fight. All right. And Golovkin against Canelo, both fights, especially the second fight. The second fight was even a better fight. All right. I think Canelo gassed out a little bit in that second fight. But the first fight was, I mean, the second fight, Canelo gassed out in the first fight, but the second fight was like a back and forth throughout the whole fight. It was a good fight. Good scrap. All right. And, Taylor against Prograis, I brought that up before. Great fight. Donaire against Inoue. Spence versus Porter this year. These are all the fights that happened this year. All right. So, listen, I think that's pretty much my wrap up of the decade. I'm sure there's plenty of things, but it's hard to remember what happened in the earlier time of the decade. But what I will say is, as going into a new decade, I feel like boxing is in a better space than it was in 2010, 2011. I think there are more fans. If you have a YouTube channel, if you're a newer YouTube channel, it's more volume. I remember making videos back then. It was like me getting 500 views in a video was like such a big deal back then. I remember when all the top YouTubers only had 1,000 subscribers, 3,000. Like, I remember when guys like Carcino and 78 Sports TV and Boxing Beats and Rhymes and like all of the channels that were around that are big today. I remember when they only had like 3,000 subscribers. I remember that time. And then it just the boxing community was it was so small. It was. This is before the Lions Den and the LDBC, and this is before they were like it was divided. There were channels that had beef with each other, but I remember when YouTube was a small group of people. And back then it was mostly Mayweather Pacquiao talk, but outside of that, there wasn't that many channels. And I came in 2013, and we used to all communicate with each other. It might sound crazy now, but all of us were like communicating with each other. It wasn't really that many beefs at the time. And it's came a long way. You got so many other newer channels. You got the whole entire LDBC, and then you have the other side of channels that have beef with them, and you had the Bruce Vanes in the world, and you have the Showbiz channel. You have Hatman, who was a big channel back then too. He's still out there cooking. Who else do I find? You got Sporting Icons out there, IBFP out there. Damn. I'm trying to think of everybody out there, man. It's you got so many channels, man. I can't think of them all. I get a brain freeze whenever I try to think of shout out YouTube channels. But there's so many channels that have come and gone throughout the years, and then there's so many channels that came and they just shot out really quickly. Because you can do that today because now boxing is bigger and people are coming back. I do think that MMA overall just became bigger. And I noticed. And I'll talk more about this when I do a video on discussing the streaming channels. Like I did talk about it a little bit earlier briefly, speak on ESPN and DAZN and PPC, and I did that. But I do want to do a video where I compare the three since I subscribe and I follow all three. I have subscribed to Showtime and everything. I wanted to compare them all. But man, YouTube is so much bigger. I think I gained over half my subscribers within this past year alone, even with the breaks that I take. It just goes to show the growth in YouTube and the boxing community too, and the fans. There's a lot of new fans. I think boxing is getting bigger, but I also believe that I think a lot of new fans are jumping in the sport and just fully focused on the politics right away, which I think sucks. Because like let's say you're a fan of Bud or Wilder or Crawford or Fury, you know, you as a new boxing fan, anyone that's defending those fighters, Joshua, if you're defending any of those fighters, you're so involved in the politics, and there's stuff you may not know because you're new to it. You're just knowing, you're hearing it from other people on YouTube, but you're thinking that that's the way it goes. Sometimes they're right, sometimes it's wrong, but a lot of new fans don't understand that when you come to a channel, you could be hearing it from a force. I'm trying to think of the word, a false source, an unreliable source, because YouTubers are biased. Some YouTubers have agendas. It's a difference between being biased and having an actual agenda. You know, um, so it's you're gonna get that, but you know what? That's sports anywhere. I follow basketball, so you're gonna get that with basketball as well. You know what I'm saying? Like if you are a LeBron fan, you're a Kobe fan, you're a Jordan fan, those three are always getting compared to each other. People are gonna have different arguments and stuff like that. But yeah, I just think that I think the worst thing is the politics of the sport. The politics play a role so much in this sport because of the way that it's regulated compared to other sports. Boxing is so corrupt, man. It is. Let's be real. Let's be honest. I'm sure there's corruption in every sport. There is corruption, but when it comes to boxing, man, it's just like, yo, it's just the way things are done is real sketchy sometimes. The way fights are made, the way fights don't get made. The drugs. Uh, you know what I'm saying? The sanctioning bodies, the promoters, the networks. You know, Politics playing a role, marketing, fighters, pound for pound lists, real sketchy. Titles. It's sketchy. The sport is so corrupt. Fighters faking injuries just to get out of fights. You know, it's just so corrupt. It's so corrupt. Gloves, guys, gloves get switched around. It's a sketchy sport. But when we get a good fight, we love it. And it keeps us right here. There's been times where I wanted to give up even doing YouTube videos on this, because it's such a dirty sport and it drains you when you got to talk about like all the negatives about the sport. But man, it is what it is. This is by far the longest video I've ever done too, by the way. But get used to it because the Patreon videos are coming and they're gonna be hour and a half long videos. All right, so I'm personally I purposely prepared this to be a long video because I wanted to talk about an entire decade. All right, so definitely get prepared for long videos on Patreon when that starts. But anyway, that's my decade wrap up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Sorry for the long delay. I know you guys have been waiting for me to talk about a lot of these things. Rest in peace to all the fighters that lost their lives in the ring this past decade, especially with 2019. We lost so many this year. So rest in peace to everyone that lost their life, fighting. Okay. And yeah, let's get it. 2010, 2020, we're here. All right. So anyway, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stick around. More videos coming on the way, especially this week. Got a lot of catching up to do. All right. All right. Peace.